Before we begin, I want to set the frame clearly. This isn't about a specific political party. It's not about one politician. It isn't about an election cycle. It's about patterns. It's about how prejudice in any society survives cultural change. Every ideology, every nation, every movement believes it stands on the right side of history. That's precisely why this conversation matters. This isn't about labeling people, it's about examining language. Because when we stop examining language, we stop examining ourselves. We like to believe racism is something we defeated, a relic of the past. Segregation, slurs, explicit exclusion, something obvious, loud, ugly. But hatred rarely disappears. It adapts. Every society believes it has progressed beyond its worst instincts. And in many ways, we have. But when social norms change, prejudice doesn't die. It mutates. When overt racism becomes unacceptable, it doesn't survive in its original form. It rebrands. There was a time when prejudice was explicit. Biological hierarchy, open exclusion, clear lines drawn in public. It was easier to identify, easier to confront. But when societies begin to condemn something, that thing learns to speak a new language. The language shifts. Direct hostility becomes coded concern. Not, we are superior, but we're preserving order. Not, exclude them, but maintain standards. Not race, culture. Not hatred, security. When direct hostility becomes socially unacceptable, it becomes abstract. And abstraction is powerful because once prejudice is abstract enough, it stops looking like hate. It starts looking like protection. The language becomes civilizational. We're defending Western values. We're protecting heritage. We're securing borders. We're preserving tradition. Of course, reading it, the phrases aren't inherently racist. That's what makes this complicated. Not every concern about immigration is racism. Not every appeal to culture is prejudice. Not every defense of tradition is bigotry. Prejudice is patient. It survives by attaching itself to legitimate concerns, fear of economic instability, cultural change, the losing of status. Consider how demographic change is discussed today. You'll hear phrases like replacement, invasion, we're losing our country. The language sounds existential, civilizational. But beneath that language is often a quieter anxiety. Not just loss of policy or loss of jobs, loss of dominance. When demographic anxiety becomes framed as moral decline, prejudice can re-enter the room without announcing itself. And the most dangerous shift happens when anxiety attaches itself to the sacred. One of the clearest modern examples of this is the rise of Christian nationalism. Again, Christian nationalism, not Christianity, not faith itself, but the fusion of national identity with divine mandate. When a nation is described not just as important, but chosen. When political loyalty becomes spiritual loyalty. When defending borders becomes defending God's design or God's people. That's not theology. That's power wrapped in scripture. And once something is framed as God's will, disagreement isn't just political, it becomes sinful. And when dissent becomes sinful, prejudice feels righteous. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Every generation believes it would have stood on the right side of history. We imagine ourselves immune to the blind spots of the past, but no one believes they're the villain in their own story. Prejudice rarely introduces itself as hatred. It usually arrives as fear. Fear of losing something, the fear of being replaced, the fear of becoming irrelevant. And when fear becomes moralized, it becomes almost untouchable. The question isn't, are people racist? That question shuts down conversations immediately. Deeper question would be, what fears are we being taught to sanctify? What narratives are we absorbing without noticing? Who benefits when we feel under siege? Because fear is powerful. And fear is profitable. Political movements grow around it. Media ecosystems thrive on it. And like I said before, influencers monetize it. Outrage converts. Anxiety mobilizes. Civilizational panic raises money. The problem isn't love of country. The problem is when love of country becomes fear of people. The problem isn't faith. The problem is when faith is used to sanctify hierarchy. As someone of faith myself, I don't believe belief should harden us. I believe it should humble us. If our convictions can't survive questioning, they aren't convictions. They're insecurities. Prejudice that screams is easy to confront. Prejudice that whispers is harder. But prejudice that feels righteous is the hardest of all. When bias hides inside policy language, it becomes respectable. When it hides inside culture, it becomes defensible. When it hides inside the sacred, it becomes nearly untouchable. And that's when it becomes most dangerous, because at that point, it doesn't look like hatred. It looks like virtue. It takes courage to question what feels sacred. It takes courage to examine narratives that benefit us. It takes courage to ask whether our fears are protecting something good or protecting our comfort. Real strength isn't loud certainty. Real strength is the ability to interrogate your own convictions, especially the ones that feel righteous. And I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm asking you something harder. Slow down. Examine the language. Ask who benefits. If you think I'm wrong, challenge me. But challenge the ideas, not the caricature. We grow by confronting complexity, not avoiding it. None of us are immune. Not you, not me, Every era believes it has moved beyond its blind spots. But the real test isn't whether we denounce the past. It's whether we can recognize it when it changes form. If prejudice can learn to hide, we have to learn to see. And that begins with honesty, even when it's uncomfortable.